Welcome to This Explainer. I'm genuinely so excited to be guiding you through today's topic because honestly, we're looking at a story of just astonishing, continuous reinvention. Today, we're diving into the very foundation of England, tracing the absolute metamorphosis of a nation across a massive 1,500-year timeline.
So, here's the big question. How on earth did a fractured island of pirate mercenaries actually transform into the modern state we know today? I mean, it's a huge historical scope, for sure. But the source material we're unpacking shows us exactly how this happened. We're talking conquest, plague, revolution, and the roaring fires of industry.
Okay, let's dive into this. We have a highly structured roadmap to navigate over a millennium of history. We'll start with our foundations from Saxons to Normans, move into the medieval crucible, explore the Tudors, Stuarts, and Revolution, look at the Industrial Transformation, and finally wrap up with World War II and tomorrow.
Starting right off with Section 1, Foundations, Saxons to Normans.
This whole story truly kicks off in a chaotic power vacuum. Picture this, the mighty Roman Empire just packs up into parts Britain in 410 AD. Right after that, by 429 AD, Saxon pirates, who, funny enough, were actually brought in as mercenaries to protect the land, well, they penetrated far inland and basically decided to stay. It took a really long time, until 927 AD, for King Aethelstan to finally unify these territories into a single kingdom. And then, barely a century and a half later, everything gets flipped upside down again with the Norman Conquest in 1066.
Now, before the Normans showed up, the Anglo-Saxon period was all about the heptarchy. Think of it as a bunch of fractured, competing petty kingdoms that eventually got so desperate they had to pay literal extortion money, the Danegeld, just to keep invading Vikings happy. But then William the Conqueror wins the Battle of Hastings in 1066, and boom, that fractured landscape is violently, ruthlessly forged into a highly centralized state.
And honestly, nothing illustrates this extreme Norman control better than the Doomsday Book. It literally earned its ominous name because its decisions were seen as unalterable as Judgment Day. It's this exhaustive catalog of all lands and property, and it reveals something mind-blowing. Within just 20 years of the conquest, the original English ruling class had been almost entirely dispossessed. The Normans tightened their grip on state administration and completely rewired society from the ground up.
Moving on to Section 2, the medieval crucible.
This medieval period was defined by some severe growing pains. We're talking civil wars, international conflicts, and the slow, messy breakdown of the feudal system. But what's really fascinating here is how absolute crises unexpectedly shifted power. Take the Black Death in the 14th century. It decimated the population, which was horrific, but it made labor suddenly scarce. So everyday farm workers could actually demand better wages. Small farming strips got consolidated, trade expanded, and powerful new merchant guilds popped up. It basically created a brand new urban elite that started challenging the old aristocratic order.
Which brings us to Section 3, Tudors, Stuarts, and Revolution.
Now, what's really interesting about this next shift as we move into the early modern period is how the 15th century was dominated by the devastating Wars of the Roses. You had the House of Lancaster battling the House of York. But Henry VII's victory at Bosworth Field in 1485 literally and politically merged these two rival factions. This merger, symbolized by the iconic Tudor rose, created the legendary Tudor dynasty and secured a tenuous but absolutely vital peace.
And it was during this Tudor period that the English Reformation changed everything. Henry VIII decided to completely sever ties with the Pope in Rome to establish the Church of England. Neutrally speaking, this was a monumental shift that deeply fragmented English society along religious lines, spawning dissenters and Puritans, while simultaneously centralizing an immense, unprecedented amount of power right into the English state itself. Power that, by the way, it still holds today.
As we shift over to the Stuart dynasty, the tension between the monarchy and parliament really reached a breaking point. King Charles I firmly believed in his absolute divine power, and that belief sparked a bloody civil war culminating in his shocking execution by parliamentarians in 1649. For a brief moment, England actually became a republic under Oliver Cromwell, but as history often does, the pendulum swung right back by 1660 when the monarchy was restored with his son, Charles II.
So the crucial point here is that this violent tug-of-war eventually had a definitive winner. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 deposed yet another king, James II, and led directly to the 1689 Bill of Rights.
This permanently shifted the balance of power, putting Parliament firmly in dominance over the monarchy. It essentially established the exact constitutional framework that England still operates under right now.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into the Industrial Transformation.
With a political framework finally stabilized, the 18th and 19th centuries brought massive technological leaps that completely redefined the world. England shifted from a largely agrarian society, think quiet, rural cottage industries, into an absolute powerhouse of roaring steam engines and urban factories. This centralized production system allowed for mass manufacturing and economies of scale on a level the world had literally never seen before, totally cementing Great Britain's status as a formidable global empire.
But we have to recognize that this progress came at a severe human cost. On one hand, industrialization created a booming middle-class bourgeoisie, engineers, merchants, and entrepreneurs who were enjoying brand new wealth, literacy, and political influence. But in stark contrast, the urban working class was pouring into rapidly growing cities like Manchester and Birmingham. They faced overcrowded slums, terrible sanitation, and the brutal, dangerous realities of child labor in those very same factories.
And that brings us into the 20th century with our final section, World War II and Tomorrow. All of this industrial and imperial might was pushed to its absolute limits during the Second World War. Just consider this staggering number, 55.3%. That represents the peak proportion of Britain's entire gross domestic product devoted entirely to the war effort in 1943. It was an astonishing level of total national mobilization, heavily funded by taxation, selling off investments, and American Lend-Lease aid. To put that into perspective, this mobilization required the civilian population to completely change how they lived and, crucially, how they ate. German blockades constantly threatened to starve the island, so domestic agriculture had to massively step up. Aided by the Women's Land Army and widespread civilian victory gardens, domestic food output just soared. Wheat production shot up 81% and potatoes climbed 96%. Meanwhile, meat consumption plummeted by 36% as people relied on really meager rations. The entire nation literally adapted their diets just to survive. And this incredible shared sacrifice during the People's War sparked a fierce demand for a better post-war society. The famous Beveridge Report came out and outlined a literal war on 5 giant evils: want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. Targeting these directly birthed the modern post-war consensus. It led to the creation of the National Health Service, expanded secondary education, and built the modern welfare state, essentially as a hard-earned reward for the public's wartime endurance. But victory definitely came at a price. The immense financial drain of fighting 2 world wars left the treasury nearly empty. This severely weakened the nation's imperial grip and really accelerated a massive wave of global decolonization. England was forced to fundamentally reconstitute its identity all over again, transitioning from the sprawling core of the largest empire in recorded history right back to an independent constitutional monarchy. Which brings us right to now. Think about it, from invited mercenaries to the heptarchy, from the Doomsday Book all the way to the Bill of Rights, and from steam engines to the welfare state. So, how do the echoes of these massive historical shifts still define English identity today? I'd really encourage you to reflect on how these 1,500 years of continuous reinvention aren't just some distant history, but the living, breathing foundation of the country today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.